And Brics leaders will meet in South Africa from Tuesday to discuss how to turn a loose club of nations accounting for a quarter of the global economy into a geopolitical force that can challenge the West's dominance in world affairs. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who faces an international arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, will not be joining the leaders from Brazil, India, China and South Africa amid rifts over whether to expand the bloc to include dozens of global South nations queuing up to join. However, South Africa will host Chinese President Xi Jinping, Brazil's Luiz Inácio and Indian Prime Minister for the Brics Summit, which is from 22nd to 24th. Well, for few details have emerged about what they will plan to discuss, but expansion is expected to be high on the agenda as some 40 nations have shown interest in joining either formally or informally, according to South Africa. Well, they include Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Egypt, and China is seeking to expand its geopolitical influence as it tussles with the United States and wants to enlarge Brics quickly. Well, let's talk more on this with Matt Kindiger, our Friday guest, the practice leader, Sub-Saharan Africa with Front of View. Thank you so much for your time again this Friday, Matt. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. So,
fantastic.
So what does this meeting really mean for Africa? I mean, not other continents. We see only South Africa is a member now, but we see a country like Egypt indicating interest to join. So what does it mean holding these Brics in South Africa for that matter?
Well, there are a few things to think about. I mean, the BRICS conference comes at a very interesting time for the region because at the moment there's quite a lot of competition between, say, the US, China, Russia for influence in the region. And this takes two forms. One is sort of geopolitical interest or competition, and the other is economic. So we're seeing a lot of interest or a lot of enthusiasm by the likes of Russia to increase its influence in the region. It wants to sort of shore up support globally and become a bit of a bulwark against the West in Africa. But at the same time, both the West and Russia, China, are competing for resources in Africa, especially gas and metals. So it is a very interesting time that this is taking place. In terms of whether or not we would expect to see more nations join BRICS, at the moment, the fact that Russia has become a bit of an international pariah and does play a big role in the BRICS grouping does mean that a lot of countries may think twice about trying to join the BRICS organization and perhaps distancing themselves a little bit from the West and the US. So at the moment, it's a bit uncertain if an expansion of the BRICS region is inevitable.
Yeah, because I was also thinking the sentiment that will come around South Africa. Remember the first time they talked about Mr. Putin going to South Africa for these BRICS, it affected their economy, their rand dropped and all of that. So I'm thinking of the West sentiment towards South Africa being the host.
Yeah, so South Africa is walking a bit of a tightrope at the moment. It really is very conscious of the fact that it needs to retain and continue to attract Western investment. It has a very open economy. It's very closely economically integrated with Europe and the US. It relies quite heavily on tourist revenues, for example, from those countries and financial flows. South Africa, I mean, it really does depend on what announcements are made regarding South Africa's relationship with especially Russia over the next, during the BRICS summit. So, for example, if we do see some very firm commitments from the South African government to tighten or sort of deepen relations, especially militarily, with Russia, then you could see investor sentiment, especially from the West, deteriorate towards South Africa at the moment. Our view is that South Africa is unlikely to commit to anything openly just yet because it doesn't want to scare off too many Western investors. But yes, all eyes will be on any announcements that will be made. But really, when we look at investor sentiment towards South Africa, the things that are actually a bit more important at the moment are things like sentiment ahead of the election in May 2024, and also what's happening with the economy domestically, especially around power shortages. Those are two things that investors will be also very worried about.
Yeah, I noticed how you said openly there, you emphasized that. But do you see them feasting on this de-dollarization of the world attempt? Do you see them feasting on that?
So I think there will be announcements and plans to sort of make moves towards de-dollarizing or sort of creating an alternative to the dollar. But in our view, the de-dollarization of the world is probably a bit overhyped at the moment. I think there are likely to be sort of bilateral agreements between particular countries. For example, trades in commodities could be settled in renminbi or different currencies. But at the moment, in order for there to be a viable competitor to the dollar, for example, the Chinese currency as a global reserve currency, you would need to see, for example, India get on board with this program. And at the moment, it's unlikely that India and China will agree on such a thing at the moment. We also do see with the war in Ukraine at the moment and Russia very involved in the Brics grouping at the moment, lots of countries will be very wary of committing to a new currency or a new sort of or the de-dollarization of trade, given that Russia is currently subject to sanctions and does have influence over the Brics organization. So, yes, we are likely to see more sort of non-dollar transactions globally, but actually the de-dollarization of the world is probably a bit overhyped at the moment.
All right. Well, a lot of interesting things to look forward to next week at that Brics Summit, Matt, and I know you will follow up. But thank you so much for your time and have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.